We have the fearsome twosome here today.
We do. David ditched out on us today.
David's got employee problems. I think there's probably some sickness, or I think there was just some people missing. So Dave, at Dave Can Read on Instagram, we're missing you. Welcome to episode 17 weeks in a row. We keep saying this every week. We seem to set a new record for most consecutive weeks in a row of the Books and Bourbon podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Roth, along with my co-host, Matthew Osborne. We are excited to have you. And today we have a very special guest. Remind me who it is, Matthew?
So the episode's sponsored by Dave Ramsey, Total Money Makeover. And so Dave will be joining us soon, I think, right? You invited Ramsey, didn't you?
I think I did, but I didn't want to hear that much screaming into a microphone.
My camera went out of focus. Oh, it's on focus on my...
Oh, there it comes.
Oh, well.
Maybe. Well, yeah, we do not have a special guest. This is going to be our time of the month where we do our internal team. So it's going to be Matthew and myself. We're going to sort of be continuing the conversation we had just over a month ago episode. I should look at the show notes that you put together. I'm going to say 11 or 12. We talked about understanding your margins. So we're going to talk a little bit about something I've called the stoplight budget. When we get into personal finance, I think the way you manage your personal finances really correlates to how you manage your business finances and vice versa. I think those skills are really important to have. And we're going to talk through some principles today. And I'm going to be releasing my new budget to the world. Not really. It's just a framework I've sort of thought through. And I'm going to be sharing that with everybody here. So that'll be something fun. This will be a little bit more. We'll try and keep it light. We're not going to get too much into the weeds, but we're going to share a lot of practical information as it relates to personal finances, as it relates to business. And hopefully, if that's something that's intimidating or scary for any of you, we're going to try and make it a little bit less intimidating. So if you're watching, drop us a note. I know YouTube tends to feature us more than Facebook. So drop us a note, say where you're watching in from. We got Mike Kreider on an airplane. A couple fun facts. So just before we get into industry news, a couple little small pearls. One, we're hosting look, Matthew, soon me in. We are hosting a bookseller meetup. It's invite only, unfortunately, but we got just a few coming in here to Winona Lake, Indiana. It's where I live. It's a very small town, but very beautiful. I'm actually hosting a friend from Virginia right now, and he's blown away by everything that's here. So it's kind of fun to be a tourist in the hometown. We've got Mike from California, who was one of our original guests. We've got TJ from the East Coast, and we've got Nate and Liz also from Indiana. So we're going to have 4 people here, and we'll be kind of sharing some consignment content and kind of digging into that side of the business. So that's my major book business. Going to be opening the proverbial kimono and sharing some of that here. If that goes well, maybe something we pursue in the future, but I'm looking forward to hosting in my hometown. Matthew, you've been here. We're going to definitely hit up 110 and could probably get out on the lake and just enjoy some of the aspects of a small town in Indiana. So that's part 1. Part 2 is next Wednesday. So today is Thursday, August 18. Next Wednesday, August 24, Bill Martlank, one of our repeat guests, and I will be in Atlanta. And we're going to be hosting a dinner, just a kind of a drop-by meetup. And we'll be putting some details in the Facebook group. Location TBD, probably on the north side of Atlanta. So we'll be hosting a dinner again. Maybe Top Golf will be involved. I'm sure there'll be some Jack Daniels, since that is Bill's drink of choice. So we will be hosting that in Atlanta next Wednesday. If you're in the area, if you just want to fly in on a whim and join us for some dinner, we will have some fun, just a low-key dinner. If you're in the book industry, come on out, say hello. And then Matthew, I believe the dates are October 14, 15?
14 and 15, yeah.
We are going to be hosting a name TBD, probably a seller summit. Maybe we'll retain the Turn the Page name. We're pending copyright infringement claims right now. But we're going to be doing some sort of a seller meetup in Vegas. This will be the only one we do this year, and then we'll try and get those back running. So as a recap, if you happen to be local to Winona Lake, Indiana, want to swing through, I'm sure we can find a time to swing by, catch a dinner with some of the people that are here. That is going to be this weekend, Friday, Saturday in Winona Lake. Next week, August 24, Wednesday evening, we're going to be hosting a dinner with Sell Back Your Book, Bill Martlank. That's going to be just kind of a small crew in Atlanta on the north side. So stay tuned to the Facebook group, and we'll probably drop an email as well on that. And then October 14, 15 in Las Vegas, and ticket information will be coming soon. So those are a couple fun places that you can find us. This year feels like it's slipping away already. And hopefully we are in the heart of textbook season. This is one of the bigger weeks, as most schools report back to duty this week or next. So we should see some pretty solid textbook sales over the next 4 weeks sustained. So hopefully you're having a fantastic textbook season as well. Industry news. Amazon, we kept saying we didn't have any industry news, and Matthew, I'm going to let Matthew break the bad news, but Amazon finally did something about it. They gave us something to talk about, and of course, it's never fee reductions. But Matthew, you want to share the basics there? We can kind of look at the dates and what that looks like.
Yeah, so Amazon heard that we were doing books and bourbon. They wanted to give us some industry news, and so they decided raising fees on FBA items was a good way to do that. What is the date those actually do go live? It's the Q4, but what's the actual date there?
It's going to be Q4, so I believe it's October 15 to January 14. So it's going to be the 90-day window, basically a full quarter, but starting mid-October through mid-January. If you are a Scout IQ or Pallet IQ customer, those dates will go into effect. We will push those out by October 1st is going to be our timeline. These fees are only for FBA, roughly 35-cent increase per item FBA. If you do merchant fulfilled, you're unaffected. This is Amazon's way of trying to make a few extra bucks and kind of compensate for the extra volume that's coming through. Good news is, if this is the only increase, again, fees suck. Storage fees also typically go up in Q4, so you're going to get feed to death a little bit. But those will go back down. Those will kind of get some relief from that. Don't think of it as inflation. It'll just be momentary for Q4. Last year, Q4, we had storage limits. I expect that will not happen this year. Amazon sort of overbuilt their warehouse capacity, and I would imagine that we won't have to deal with storage limitations come Q4. Just a guess. You heard it here first, but my guess is this will be probably the only thing we see from Amazon this Q4, pending anything else crazy with labor or inflation or anything else. So that's a bit of industry news. Again, it's Books and Bourbon, the show we like to say that is a little bit about bourbon and mostly about books. Matthew, are you drinking anything today?
I am. No, I'm just drinking really dirty water. No. Yeah, so I had this in one of the first few episodes, but just the Basil Hayden toast. Just a simple bourbon. I like it. It's very toasty. I don't think this is actually double oaked though, even though it's called Basil Hayden toast, because I'm pretty sure it's using a very charred new oak barrel. What's the different levels of oak barrels? There are 3 or 5 levels.
Believe there's, oh man, I think there's 5. And I think most of the time we end up with like level 2 to 3. I think typically in the middle is where things go.
Yeah, because normally I could be wrong, but normally when something says like toast or it's double barreled, which is how they're getting that extra toast, but it doesn't say that on the bottle. It just says in a new charred oak barrel. And so I'm wondering if they have one of those higher charred oak barrels that give it a little more of that toast flavor to it. But it's a good bourbon. Basil Hayden's good either way, but the Basil Hayden toast is a nice little extra kick to it, which I like.
That is a good one. I believe it is double barreled. I think that's why they call it toast, or it could just be a higher char level. But I believe I heard my favorite bartender at 110 say something about it. So I'm gonna trust Brett because he knows.
Yeah, that's probably a good one to trust.
I am still taking things easy. Had an interesting, just like a really solid, restful retreat this weekend, and have been very chill, working on breathing, those type of things. Very, very new agey, if you will. But I've not touched alcohol this week. That will probably change with the booksellers in town this weekend, but I am still easing back in. So I'm drinking some Celsius pear. Fuji apple pear is kind of my favorite. Again, there's no health claims. They try and say it's a like their tagline is live fit. It's got essential energy, i.e. caffeine, accelerates metabolism, which I think caffeine does, and then burns body fat if your metabolism is working, with lots of asterisks saying these claims have not been evaluated by the FDA. So who knows? It tastes really good. There's not a lot of extra anything in it. No aspartame, no high fructose corn syrup. I don't know. It tastes good. Seems to give a little energy, and it's a nice little pick me up in the afternoon. So
yeah, normally those low calorie drinks have that weird aftertaste that always comes with them, but the Celsius ones I've had haven't had that. There's some that somehow get away from it. They don't have that weird kind of aftertaste you get with normal low calorie drinks.
Yeah, I've been impressed with it. It's actually really, 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 really tasty. So I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties. I forgot the password on my iPad. and I'm locked out now. So I've been trying to get in. We may have to do this. Do they have a whiteboard feature here somehow?
That's a good question. I don't think so, but
I
let me
don't
look
think I can
around.
jailbreak the iPad that quickly. So I may be. I had it open and then I don't use the like it always uses the facial recognition, but I think it updated iOS. So this is embarrassing. I realized that I was forgetting the password as we like started this thing, and I've been trying to get it. Now I'm locked out. So we
Yeah, I
will.
don't think there's a virtual whiteboard. Do you have like a piece? Well, a piece of paper would be kind of hard to see on the camera.
Piece of paper is not going to be great. I might just pull up a
Yeah,
spreadsheet and we'll just kind of type
yeah,
in and kind of work our way that
that's
way.
not a
So
bad idea, actually.
we may go
I was gonna
spreadsheet.
say, have you ever made a fancy spreadsheet for your stoplight budget before?
I really haven't. I mean, I kind of have. So this will be good. Well, I think we're gonna go spreadsheet. We're gonna go off the script. So
Ooh, we'll make up a
we'll
stoplight budget and then release it as a template for the group afterwards.
we can do it. Make a little Google sheet. So we will put that technology aside. I will share my screen this way and run from there. So
I just want to give a shout out. Someone's from Castle Rock, Colorado. I love Castle Rock. It's like my favorite town there is. We lived in Castle Rock for quite a few years. Then we moved here to Arizona, and we always talked about how much we liked Castle Rock. But normally, you kind of romanticize things. But we went back to Castle Rock, and the town is just as good as we remember it. We love Castle Rock still, so I like Castle Rock a lot. We've got someone from El Paso, Texas. We've got some people from all over the place, Alabama, Atlanta. So thank you everyone for joining in. Someone else likes your drinks, Caleb.
beautiful.
Nice.
Well, let me share my screen, and we'll probably keep today a little shorter. It's already 15 past the hour. Probably talk for 30-ish, or 40 minutes. I always say that, and then we go past. We'll get to our geek out moment of the week, and we'll take a few questions. We'll probably wrap this up around 5:15 or so Eastern. So again, the topic this week, a little less business oriented. I want to talk about some more transferable skills, and particularly money management and how to make decisions in your personal finances, as well as how to make decisions as it comes to business and some of the various business models. One of the analogies I've been really playing with a lot in my mind lately is the idea of a bonfire. We're starting to get to cooler weather. We're dipping down into the 60s, even high 50s at night here in Indiana. The days are still up, high 70s, low 80s. It's perfect. I love the fall in the Midwest. It's absolutely amazing. Getting a bonfire with a couple friends and just talking about life is fantastic. One of the things with a bonfire is if you do your job right and build a good system, if you have a good pit, if you've got a good supply of firewood, and then if you build that coal system up, it allows you to kind of have even if you let the fire go out, if you've got that system in place with the coals burning, it's really easy to throw a log or some sticks back on it, blow back into the fire, breathe some life into it, and then easily get that fire sort of rekindled and running. And so those coals are the systems that you're setting up. So we're going to talk a little bit about the systems to set up finances for business, for personal finances as well. I heard a stat one time. I believe it's true because I've talked to friends about both, and sometimes it's easier for business people to talk money. But there's a stat out there, and I should have looked this up before we started because I'm probably going to slaughter it. But I think people are more comfortable talking about sex than they are talking about money. So money just tends to be a very awkward thing. We like to brag about what our sales are. We like to show off our vehicles and our houses and everything else. But in general, we don't like to talk money because it's very personal. Obviously, sex is as well, but I think people get more weirded out and awkward about money. So we're going to try and change that paradigm today. But the idea with the fire is, if you don't know what you're doing in personal finance here, one, I guess you could get burns, but two, we want to teach you these systems. And when you build a good fire, you always start with a spark, you kind of get it going. And then you want to have some newspaper or some small kindling or some small twigs. And you want to slowly breathe life into that fire and build it up. And once it's going and running at a good clip and you've got some good heat coming out of it, you can sort of add larger and larger logs into the fire until you're able to kind of put a big log and be able to experience that nice warmth. Well, all of those twigs and leaves and that initial spark are sort of these initial steps. So I want to kind of walk you through first, how are we going to set up our systems to measure? If you guys follow us for any length of time, kind of the tagline we have with the tracking spreadsheet is you can't manage it if you don't measure it. So step one is, how do we measure it? We're going to talk through these systems. If you just get overwhelmed and say, hey, I just want to be able to throw logs on a fire, you literally take a match, strike it, light one leaf on fire, and try and throw a log in, you're going to choke that fire out. So if you don't learn these systems early and sort of build them up until it's ready to sort of throw that big log on, you're going to choke your fire out. So we're going to try and teach you that. And then the same thing works in the business world. If you try and scale up too quickly, sometimes and just jump right to those big logs, you're going to run into a situation where you choke it out. So cash flow is very important. Managing your numbers is very important. And we're going to kind of go from there. So step one, let me share my screen. Matthew, I
Without
think
breaking your chain of thought, I wanted to say that it said the recent study found Americans twice as likely to be comfortable talking about sex, drug use, and mental illness than they are about money. That's pretty crazy, pretty telling.
Pretty crazy. Which is fascinating because we want to, like, we show off like, hey, I got a Rolex, or I have name brand clothes, or whatever it might be. It's like we want to show that we have money, but we don't actually want to say, hey, what's your number? What does it cost to be you?
We don't want to prove we have money. We just want to show we have.
Well, with a number of credit cards, you too can have money. So Matthew, I'm just going to share briefly. I use Mint to manage my budgets. It's awesome. They got a great interface. It's free. You can pay for some premium things. You can track your income, your assets, your debt. It kind of works for everything. I'm just going to show just a brief little bit. Again, my personal finances are personal, but what it does is it breaks down your spending by day, and you can sort of see your spending, for the month. Shows that I spend an average of $210 a day. I do have some special ones in here. First one, the biggest one, is going to be my mortgage. So you can kind of zoom in on transactions, and it shows, hey, there's your mortgage. I live in Indiana. Houses aren't that expensive, which is nice. You can kind of zoom in on any individual dates and see the transactions from that date. It does a really good job of auto categorizing. So the nice part is you hook your bank up, you can hook your credit cards up, anything that you're going to spend personally, and it pulls all of them in. And then you just get a whole list of transactions like this that you can then pop in, and it tries to guess what they are anyway. And you can, of course, recategorize and change the settings and whatever else. So it's really good. There's some initial legwork to put it in. And I just try and, in general, like this was, putt-putt with my son. So it's not restaurants. It got it wrong. It's just going to be entertainment, right? So you can kind of change things on the fly, and you can add categories for kids or family or whatever you want to do. But in general, it's going to auto categorize. It does a pretty good job. And then you can sort of build that in. You can kind of see your individual metrics. And then I'm not going to share mine, but it literally breaks down the profit loss for each individual month. So you can kind of gauge your trends. And as we get into the stoplight analogy, you can see if you're making more than you're spending. And again, the idea is to have some margin or some green left over. Matthew, what did you end up using for finances? I remember you had this conversation.
Yeah. This is back in episode 11 when I was looking for one. I started using Quicken. So I use QuickBooks for all my business stuff. Quicken is not QuickBooks. Quicken is the personal finance equivalent to it. And so far I've liked it. There's certain things I did like about Mint because I had to use that for a little while. But there's other things I like about Quicken a little bit better. Overall, they pretty much all do the same things. And one thing that we can kind of talk about this later that I found in my personal finances, which doesn't make these tools as important, is I try and track more of the broad categories of spending rather than getting really nailed down on individual specific categories, because then you have 50 categories of spending when sometimes it's more helpful to see, hey, shopping was 50% higher this month than normal. That's where I'm overspending type thing. So I don't dig down in categories extremely thoroughly. So I don't need a bunch of different categories. I can do some basic categories, and it works well for that. It shows everything well. I like the interface a little bit better than Mint. But I don't think you can go wrong with either of those. So Quicken's the program I've been using.
And if anybody's watching and uses a different one, I know there's YNAB or You Need a Budget. There's a lot of budget apps out there. Truebill maybe is one. I feel like there's a ton of them. You can go to the App Store and find it.
Dave Ramsey has one. Every Dollar or something like that.
Sounds familiar. So if you're using a different budgeting app, again, there's pros and cons to all of them. Mint, I've just had it forever, and so it's cool. I can go back to my college days. I don't want to admit how long ago that was, but I can go back.
You used it for that long?
I did. So I can go back and see my income in college, my first job, when I first started as an entrepreneur. It's kind of fascinating to see the trends and the ebbs and the flows over the years. So now I'm kind of pot committed, right? My data's all there. It's all kind of stored. I'm sure they know more about me than I know about me. But don't get too hung up on which app is like perfect. There's no perfect app. Just kind of play around. I happen to like the interface of Mint. They kind of send some cool, like they've really gamified it recently.
Yeah.
So if you're using a different budgeting app, great. We're not here to sell you on Quicken or Mint or anything. There's just find a tool that works. So step one is start measuring what's there. And if you want to be old school and just use a spreadsheet off of your bank statements, that's fine. If you don't want to use a credit card, we're not going to get into credit card versus debit versus cash. I will say if you spend cash, all the studies say that you spend less. So I tend to like using cards. I use credit cards. There tends to be more protection. Plus you get points. This is why Dave Ramsey didn't want to be on the show today because he's obviously anti-credit card. But I love credit cards. It's fun to get the, different rewards and kind of play those games and travel hacking and everything else. But in general, I use the credit card. Now everything is stored. In fact, I hate paying cash because then I have to remember to go log it separately. And I'm a big believer, exactly what Matthew just said. Don't overcomplicate. You can subcategorize and have restaurants and fine dining and fast food and casual fine dining and coffee shops and bars. You can do all of that, or you can just say, hey, I only care about restaurants and groceries or just food, right? So don't overly complicate things. You want to just set up a system that's very simple and easy. That means you're more likely to follow through. Now, a couple ways to sort of hack the system. One, you can get a virtual assistant. I've been doing that quite a bit. We do that with our Scout IQ financials now. I'm starting to do it with personal finances. So I've got a lady in the Philippines. Her name is Camille. She's fantastic. So she'll go through and she has all the rules that we've set up, and she'll actually auto categorize things and make tweaks and kind of move money around as needed to pay off the different accounts. I trust her on the back side of things. I don't give her access to my actual bank accounts yet, although there's no reason not to trust at this point, so we may. So that's a piece you can do. And then any questions she has once a week, she'll reach out with just a short punch list of here's the things I don't understand. I'll answer those quickly, and that sort of speeds up my time. So you can train a VA to do it. Again, most of the tools now auto categorize pretty well, which is nice. So that's step one, is just make sure you have a way to measure things. And then step two is we're going to try and build a framework, and we're going to talk personal finance first. Then we'll get into the weeds a little bit on business. So I'm going to share this spreadsheet. Since I forgot my iPad password, I'm probably going to have to reboot that sucker, but so be it. Rest in peace, iPad. Okay, so got the spreadsheet, handy dandy spreadsheet. Looks like that is showing fine. And again, if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to jump in and ask. We'll try and answer some in live time, then we'll try and answer some as we go. So this is going to be called the stoplight budget. Just like a stoplight, we have red, we have yellow, and we have green. And again, for those that watched some of the earlier episodes, I did draw this out briefly. The goal is to maximize green. Right? Green is in personal finance. It's how much you have left over after your monthly expenses. So it's what you're able to save. In the business world, the green is the profit, which again is cash. So green is money. It's good. It's what goes back in your pocket. So typically what you're going to do is we're going to start with the high level and say you make $6,000 a month, $5,000, whatever it is. Red is going to be anything that you have to spend. It's going to be your need. So there's two ways to run this. Again, I don't want to get too hung up in it, but in general, red is going to be your needs, yellow is going to be your wants, and green is going to be your savings. Put another way, red is anything that is a monthly commitment. So anything that is an auto pay, right? So you don't really have a choice. Subscriptions would fall under this. Yellow would be anything that is a nice to have. Those things that you kind of just choose, and then green again would still be savings. So what does this mean? So red is going to be your lodging. It's going to be your overhead. What is the rough cost to be you? So that's going to be anything directly associated to your housing, which is going to be housing, utilities. If you have an HOA, if you have trash fees, water fees, any of those things. So all of your housing expenses typically are going to fall under red, right? You can maybe change them. So a lot of times red is usually our fixed cost, and then yellow would be variable costs. Red, you could change, but basically you're locked in as long as you have an apartment, condo, whether you're living with a friend or whether you own a house, you have all these associated needs. So red is going to be your housing. I'm going to just take some notes if that makes sense. So we're going to have housing. We're going to have all the utilities, things that go with it. We're going to have your auto. So if you have a car payment, if you have gas, anything that's directly related, insurance, both home and auto. So that's going to be things that you can't really edit. You could put food in here as well. Obviously, you have to eat. In general, I tend to throw food because that's something that's kind of a variable expense. I throw that into yellow. Again, I don't want you to get hung up on this. It's not that big of a deal. Yellow is going to be anything that is going to be like entertainment, travel, vacation. They're going to fall under that. What else would fall under yellow, Matthew? Like, what are some other like just kind of monthly
I
expenses
don't.
that show
For
up?
me, a lot of the things that are in yellow actually are subscriptions, but they're want subscriptions, not need subscriptions, like Netflix and Hulu or ESPN or fancy vitamins for the kids, or all the different type of subscriptions you can have that you can cancel if you had to, if you lost your job tomorrow type thing. You can't cancel the mortgage, obviously. So those type of things always put in that kind of category of wants.
Yep. So again, I don't want to get hung up on which ones go where. It's not as important. But let's say you make 6 grand and you want to sum up all of your expenses and you're spending 3 grand on red. Let's say you're spending 2 grand on yellow, and then what's left every month, if you're able to kind of squeak it out, green is going to be what's left in the bank. Duh, bank loves fun with it. So that's going to be whatever is left. And some month it's going to change, right? So you can try and get all, like, if let's say you're going to do one big trip a year, you could allocate $500 a month to travel or $200 a month to travel, right? You could do these things and try and allocate them out, or you can just expense them as they happen. Again, whatever one floats your boat, that's great. Not that big of a deal. We don't want to get hung up on it. But in general, red, you're not going to see these fluctuate too much. Of course, utilities might vary summer to winter. You might have gas differs based on if you're traveling, like in the summer tends to go up, or as gas prices go up, of course. But in general, your housing, many of you have fixed mortgages or fixed rent payments. So those are going to be roughly the same. Utilities are roughly the same, and you're going to be looking at this. So what you can do is say, hey, if my monthly income is 6 grand, and again, those of us that are self-employed, we don't always have a fixed monthly income. But you want to take that number divided by that number, and you can say it's 50%, for example. So what that allows you to do is drop that in. Say, all right, so 50% of my income is red. So now I only have 50% left to play with. And then you can come down here, do the same thing. It's going to be, do the job. There we go. We got to set up formulas to do automatic. And then, so we got a third of our income there, and then we're going to have a sixth, or 17% is green. So the goal is higher is better down here. What are some rough rules of thumb? One thing I thought would be fun would be to sort of crowdsource this, kind of like we do with Scout IQ, but we'd be able to go to users and say, do you want to share your anonymous data with other users? So you can look at people that live in the Midwest that make 6 grand a month and look at their expenses and say, on average, they put 50% to red, 30% to yellow, etc. But that'd be kind of fun. As a general rule, there's something called the 50-30-20 rule. And I believe Elizabeth Warren, that, the one you think of, came up with it. So 50% in general is sort of a good amount to put to your must-haves. 30% is sort of a good number to target for your nice-to-haves, and 20% would be ideal, what you're going to be saving. Now, this may change based on where you are in life. But what we're going to do is if you have, let's say you make 6 grand a month and you've got 4 grand allocated to just cost of living. Let's say you're out in California, rent is very expensive, utilities are expensive, gas is more expensive. Why do you guys live in California? Anyway, I get it. The weather's nice. It's a nice place to be. But if you end up with a really high red area and then you're spending the rest on yellow, that means you have zero to be saving. Well, what does that mean? You have zero margin that month, right? So net operating margin, income minus expenses equals zero. If that's the case, then you have zero left over to spend. Well, why is that a problem? Well, if you drive over a nail and you need a new tire and it's $250 for a new tire, you don't have the money to pay. That's where credit comes in. Now you've got to kind of borrow against your yellow the next month, which means you might be eating ramen to try and pay off the credit card bill. And then if something else goes wrong, you dig deeper into a hole. And again, depending on where you are in life, sometimes that's just inevitable. I never want to throw shade. Everybody's got their own battles and fighting their journeys. That's great. But if you have a good month, just like if you're growing crops, you want to set aside some crops. You want to be able to save those for a rainy day, because sometimes the sun don't shine. Sometimes the rain doesn't come. And it's nice to have a little bit stored up and saved. Again, if we're going to talk, Ramsey, he talks about having like a 6-month emergency fund. I think 3 months is step one. And then you want to eventually get to 6 to 9 months, because if something happens, you can say, hey, I'm okay. I've got a little bit of a buffer. I've got some green that's been stored up to allow me to do this. So Is lower necessarily better? Should you pinch pennies and live in a crappy area and the smallest house you could find? Some people would argue that, the FIRE movement, financially independent, retire early. You can, of course, pinch pennies here and say, I don't really need my coffee. I don't need to go to Starbucks. I can do that at home. One of the best books, and I've said this before, is I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. Have you read that one, Matthew?
Yep, I've read that one a few times. Yeah.
So he talks about money dials and the concept of you got to pick what's important to you. So for me, golf is something that's very important. I love spending time with my friends. I love the travel element. I love the challenge of golf. So for me, within reason, like golf is one of those categories that if my friend calls me and says, "Hey, we're doing this golf trip next month. Do you want in?" The answer is always yes. I don't, as long as my schedule can accommodate, as long as the business can handle it. I don't really care what it costs unless it's ridiculous. But golf for me is something I'm going to spend extravagantly. Now, other areas, I don't care that much. I'm not that much of a clothing guy. I wear t-shirts. I got a lot of Scout IQ swag. I don't really care about clothing. So I'm not going to overspend in clothing. That's an area where I probably spend less than a lot of other people in, my income, my location, my gender, my age, all of that. So you got to pick what's important to you. And if that latte is very important, go for it. Matthew, what's something that's kind of important in your world that you would kind of just spend anything on?
Important that I spend anything on. I don't have like one hobby that's specific that I spend more money on than like anything else. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of different conveniences, like certain things of conveniences I just really, really like to have. Like this isn't something we spend a ton of money on, but is grocery delivery to the house. Like it's pretty cheap through Walmart. We don't have to take the kid to the store and walk around. It's a convenience, but it's something I'm willing to spend money on because it takes so much less time from us that we can put towards other things. So I don't have one hobby. I have a lot of different hobbies I spend a decent amount on, but none of them that I spend a ton of my money on that I'm kind of willing to spend anything on. I need to find something like golf that I just love that much.
Well, I mean, convenience is actually a really important one. So the idea of like trading your dollars for time instead of your time for dollars. You could go to the grocery store and get your groceries, right? Or you can just pay a little extra and have them show up. And for you, that might be worth it, especially considering you have to drag kids to the grocery store. You got to go out in the hot, 120 degrees in the summer in Arizona. You got to dodge snakes like you're doing in your backyard and, go do that. So that might be important to you. You may start to extend that and say, you know what, we could pay a maid to come in and clean once a month. Maybe not every week, but maybe once a month just to sort of help that. So convenience might be something that you start to kind of hone in on and say, hey, I'm okay trading some of my hard-earned dollars to sort of buy back time. That's a very valid, category to be spending on. Going back to the red, yellow, green. Green, this kind of breaks down with the fire analogy, but green, the more green you can save and kind of store up. Again, we don't necessarily need to hoard. I talk a lot about the concept of enough, but the more that you can sort of set aside, those are the coals. So again, those are red in the fire situation, but green gives you that coal base where if you let the fire go out, if life kind of comes at you, if you lose your job, if big expenses pile up, if your health changes, you sort of have that coal bed that you can then fall back on, and you can kind of spend some money even though you might not have as much coming in, or maybe your red or yellow went way up, and you can kind of eat into that base without too much concern. So that's something nice that can kind of give you a little bit of peace of mind as you work toward things. So let's switch gears. If anybody has questions there, let us go there as well. If you have questions, sorry, go ahead and ask those. We can get into that. So that's the essentials of red, yellow, green. Again, make sure you have some sort of software to track. If it's a spreadsheet for you, great. If it's Mint, if it's Quicken, if you need a budget, all of those are great opportunities. But what you want to do then is at the end of each month, and here's where the budget gets fun. Your budget typically is, we do this in reverse. So we get to the end of the month and we look back. So right now it's mid-August. We might wait till September 1st, September 5th when expenses settle out, and look back at the month of August and say, how'd we do? Our goal was 50%, 30%, 20%, red, yellow, green. How did we do? So you kind of look backwards in the rearview mirror and say, did we do okay? So I think that's really important to do that with a family meeting, to do it with yourself. I like to put it on a whiteboard and just kind of step back and go, all right, how'd we do, Caleb? Here was the goal. Where this gets fun is one of the biggest things I believe about money is if you don't tell your money where to go, it will just simply evaporate. So if you don't have a plan, money just tends to disappear, right? You don't have any rules in place. Your friends are like, hey, do you want to come on this trip? Do you want to come out for drinks? Do you want to come out for food? And before you know it, your money's gone for the month. And it just kind of evaporated into the universe or into the yellow category. And you have nothing left at the end of the month. So 2 ways to combat that. One is stop playing step one is sort of figure out what it costs to be you. So you can run this for a month or 2 or 3 and sort of get your basic numbers to say, all right, what is the normal breakdown? What's my normal income? What's my normal expenses, red, yellow, green, and then sort of set up some budgets. Where it starts to get fun is when you start to be strategic and proactive and say, all right, now it's September 1st, or maybe even the day before. So 30 days after, 31 days in August, I believe. So you take on the 31st of August, you might sit down and say, all right, I'm planning on making $6,000 again. Nothing is changing in my income as far as I can see. We are going to try and now allocate. Here's the goals for the month. And we are now going to put the money in those buckets. A lot of banks now allow you to have buckets. Ally Bank does it. Several do. There's some online only banks that do it, but Ally is probably the most trustworthy and least likely to shut down, since banks I recommend tend to shut down. So Ally Bank, ALLY, it's pretty good. You can do subcategories and kind of chunk this out. And then you're telling your money where to go. The other thing you can do is Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. Not sure how to say his name. It's a really good book. And the main concept is pay yourself first. He applies it to business. We can apply it to here. So if you're going to make $6,000 and your goal is to save 20%, quick math says that's $1,200. You want to actually take the first $1,200 you get and put that into savings where you probably can't touch it. Now, if you need to dig in because life was hard and red and yellow went way up, that's fine. But you want to pay yourself first or save first instead of kind of waiting till the end of the month and going, well, whatever's left is just whatever I have. So that's where it starts to get fun, where you be proactive. All right, let's switch gears slightly. How does this apply to business? So we've got red, yellow, green as it relates to personal. Let's get into how this relates to business. We're going to kind of drop this back down. That's going to bug me if they don't quite look right. All right, so we'll leave that alone. Drop that over and that over. So on the business side of things, let's talk about someone that is just starting out and trying to run an Amazon business. Let's say they're cherry picking. So what kind of overhead would you have if you are cherry picking? So let's say you want to run a cherry picking operation. So what do you need that's going to be overhead in your business? Well, you probably operate out of your home office, so you don't have any increased expenses at home. You may need some scouting software. We can throw that into red. That's going to be something that is kind of a need to have, right? You could use the seller app. You could use some, there's probably some free tools out there. You pay for your scouting software, maybe your listing. So let's just kind of generically just say you got software, right? You might have a barcode scanner, but that's not a monthly expense. That's a one-time expense, right? That's going to be something that's yellow. These are going to be variable expenses. So red is going to be something that repeats monthly. So your software expenses. Everything else, you already have your car, so you're already doing that. Yellow would be like supplies, scanners. It's going to be things like gas for your automobile, for your sourcing trips. It's going to be inventory costs. You're not going to have a lot of red. So the nice part is when you're just starting out, anything else, Matthew, you could think of that would be monthly?
Besides like software, a pro seller account might be kind of counted as software, but a pro seller account and then insurance for sellers and Amazon now, but that's going to be a low monthly fee as well for people that have that.
Perfect. So those might be your bare minimum. Those aren't going to run you a whole lot. The pro seller account, if you're selling more than 40 items a month, pays for itself. It's free. Software, depending on your tech stack, maybe anywhere from $15 a month to 150 maybe if you got everything. Insurance is very cheap, especially if you're a small seller. And then the yellow ones, these are just going to scale as your business scales. So your overhead here is incredibly low. Let's say you run a small operation, your goal is just to make $2,000 a month. Well, if software only runs you, kind of throw that back up in here. If software is only running you, let's say $150 a month between insurance, seller account, software, that's hardly anything. You're hardly touching the red category. Excuse me. Yellow is going to ramp up as your business ramps up. Let's say you're spending $600 a month on that, and green is going to be what you get to save. Now remember, this isn't 2,000 in sales. This is 2,000 in Amazon payouts, which means you probably need $3,500 to $4,000 of sales to reach that, right? But if you're bringing in $2,000 after Amazon fees, what Amazon's paying you, and you keep your tech stack incredibly nimble, that's going to leave you with, $1,250 to put in your bank. Now, the cool part is this $1,250 now goes into the top of your personal finance bucket. This increases your number, which now lowers all of your percentages here. So if this goes up to $7,250, now all of a sudden your extremely expensive California lifestyle gets diluted and it starts to have some better ratios. And now you actually have some money left over. You've got some margin that then goes back into green, which now goes into your personal savings. So as a general rule, the flow is you want to make sure you're getting money back out from your Amazon operation. You want to kind of review your tech stack, make sure that you're being smart with your categories, your monthly fixed costs, those recurring expenses, as well as the variable costs that rise and flow as your inventory rises and goes down. And then you want to have your green or your profit, which is going to be spit back out. Now, your first profits are going to sort of cycle back up, and you're going to put those back into typically your yellow category here, which is going to be putting more inventory. So adding bigger sticks to the fire. And then at some point when you can no longer spend this money back on inventory, or you're happy with where your business is at, you can then start taking some of these dollars and pouring them back into your personal finance. So that's the cool part. That's how these two pieces, business and personal, they tend to overlap. Now, the same rules apply here. You could actually set up Mint and do the same thing. You can use Quicken for business. I would use a different account. I don't like to mix business and pleasure, but you don't want to mix business and personal. The IRS hates that as well. So get a separate bank account, get a business credit card. You can use a personal credit card, but make sure it's only used for business, just so you have separation. On the business side, I use Wave Apps. It's free accounting software. It's dual entry. I'm an accounting nerd, so that's cool. You could totally use Mint or Quicken or QuickBooks. QuickBooks is probably the number one choice. It's got a lot of great integrations, but you're basically going to do the same thing where you make sure you can track everything. And then again, you want to review this at the end of each month and say, how did we do? What you then do is, again, we want to get to the point where we're strategic. So we're going to keep feeding this fire, putting more and more of that profit back into the form of firewood to kind of grow that fire bigger and bigger and bigger until, let's say you have a family of 4, that fire is big enough to support the family of 4. Now you can choose, do we keep growing and try and raise our standard of living? Or are we able to, is the business sustainable? Can we now just put just enough wood on the fire to sustain those 4 people around it, and then sort of take the extra heat or, those green profits and put that back into our personal income now, right? So that's kind of how the stoplight budget works. Matthew, any questions on that or how that kind of works?
No, not really. This is a comment based on something I said a little while ago, but you're talking about the different ways you can budget, how you can kind of budget ahead of time of what you think is going to happen for the month, or you can look back at the past month and see how it went and kind of compare it to what you're trying to do. Why you need a budget, ynab.com is exactly that first category of giving basically every dollar a job that's in your account before the month is started. So it's kind of setting up those buckets, seeing how much you expect to have for that month and allocating all those dollars a job, giving each dollar a job. And that's kind of how that budget is set up, where normal budgeting software, kind of like more of the things like Mint or the other main ones out there, are the opposite, where it's kind of you're setting your budget, then you're looking back at the past month and kind of seeing how you did. So for those of you that like that style of budgeting, why you need a budget, ynab.com is exactly tailored to that kind of philosophy of giving every dollar a job before it's even shown up.
I believe that's a paid app, right?
Yes, it is. It's not crazy expensive though. I forget how much it is, but it's not. You can pay for the year, and it's not too bad at all. Comes out to like $5 a month, I believe, if you pay for the year up front. So it's not terrible.
Perfect. And part of this too, and again, we talk about it. I won't get too much into it, but part of it, telling dollars where to go, is saying, hey, if I'm going to be making income, you need to start setting aside some of that income for taxes. You need to start setting aside some of that income for whatever the next stage your business might take. So let's say you say, hey, I want to start building a baby bulk empire. Well, now we still have software. We still have the Amazon Pro Seller account. We still have insurance. But we're going to start adding to our overhead. We might have a storage unit. Maybe we have a forklift, right? So you might have to get some equipment. You might have a pallet jack. So you start having some fixed, and again, those would actually be on the yellow section, but the storage unit's a monthly cost. Let's say you lease the forklift. That's going to show up in the, your fixed overhead, so to speak. That's something you can't just change easily. Now you're going to have, you got some more equipment here, but now you're going to be spending even more on inventory, and you've got to pay for freight. sort of truckloads of inventory, right? So you have FTL, full truckload, freight, Gaylords, pallets, books, of course. So you start to increase your overhead. So the question is, and this is something you have to figure out before you even start your business, and maybe as you get into it. Again, as you get started, you're just trying to see, can we light a spark? Can we get a leaf on fire? Can we get a napkin on fire? Can we get some newspaper on fire? Can we get some small twigs on fire? Once you prove to yourself that, hey, this works, I can light this spark, I can start growing this fire. Now you got to go, all right, this is working. Do I want to build a massive fire? A massive fire is going to consume a lot of wood. It's going to consume a lot of resources. In order to build a massive fire, you have to be committed to continually feeding the fire. If you're not able to do that, if you've got too much overhead and you're not able to do it, that fire is going to starve and kind of go back down to a smaller level. Conversely, sometimes we've had people reach out and say, hey, do you guys need cash? Here's a loan, or Amazon does that to us all the time. If you just take tons of cash and just buy tons of inventory and just feed the fire, you might starve it out as well if you don't have those systems in place to be able to handle that sort of volume. So on the baby bulk side of things, you start to see that your overhead starts to go up, right? And now your red section is going to be higher. Your yellow section definitely is going to be higher as you're buying more inventory. And so you might actually take steps back, and you're probably going to be negative profit for at least 3 to 6 months in most cases in the baby bulk game as you sort of ramp that inventory up. Well, what if we want to take it to the next level and do bulk? Well, now we need a warehouse. Now you definitely need employees. Now you're going to have payroll. So you're going to have a lot of other expenses related to that. You got, utilities, and you're going to have internet, and you're going to have all these things that at home you had a space to list the books. You had internet already because you probably already have internet. You've got a roof over your head. You've got maybe a spare bedroom or a spare bathroom that can be your office. But when you start to get into the bulk world, now your red area is growing. So you have to figure out, what's the goal of this fire? What's the goal of this business? What are we trying to build? And can we get there with a very simple, low overhead model where the red and yellow categories are very minimal? And if the answer is yes, this is going to be the lowest headache out of all of them. Now, if you're driven, you want to hustle, you want to build something up, you've got the gift of kind of organizing and keeping things in control, then by all means, start feeding that fire, try and grow a bigger fire, try and include more seats around and be able to warn more people. That's a beautiful thing. But just understand that how these categories sort of work. And again, the goal is, once you have your profit, make sure you're telling those dollars where to go, either back into the business. Those are your soldiers you can put back to fight for you. Make sure you're setting aside some to pay the tax man. And then, of course, hopefully you have some left over. Or if you're a profit first guy, make sure you pay yourself first. And again, all of the business stoplight budget, all the green, is either going back to the business or back into your personal finances, which then maybe allows you to quit your job. Maybe allows you to, if you're married, one of you can quit your job because you have enough income to replace it. So that is stoplight budget in a nutshell. So we'll stop there. We'll see if anybody has questions on that. If you have questions about tracking it or how that works. Again, very simple concept, but it's important to sort of understand how that interrelates. And in general, as it relates to these might be good questions to ask in the Facebook group as well, Matthew. Maybe we can do some little segments there where we sort of ask people that do cherry picking, how much overhead do you have? What do you typically spend on your business? Do you budget for your business? And that might be some really fascinating conversations. We can do one for the cherry pickers, for those just starting out. We can do one for consignment people. We can do one for baby bulk sellers, and then of course for bulk sellers. And if you're comfortable sharing numbers or sharing your strategies, that might be really helpful and impactful for newer sellers to sort of look at the different business models and kind of realize what realistically it takes. Because it's really fun to show our sales numbers and pull our app up and say, hey, we're doing, we're 5 figures a month or 6 figures a month. Some people are 7 figures a month in books, not that many, but they're definitely out there. And so it's really cool to show those, hit $1,000 a month. I remember my first month I did that. I remember the first day I did that. So it's really fun to see that, but ultimately sales don't matter. It's what's turning into cash. And then what are you able to do with that cash to either keep the business going or, be able to pour that money back into your personal finance, which then restarts the red, yellow, green all over again. So those are the basics. Again, make sure you have a system to track. Make sure you have some goals. And again, for personal, a really good rule of thumb is 50, 30, 20, 50 for the need to have, 30 for the nice to have, 20 for savings if you can. And if you can even save more, that allows you to kind of build a buffer and be a little bit insulated against some of the challenges or whatever life throws at you. And then in the business model, again, online arbitrage is going to be very intensive as it relates to yellow, right? You don't necessarily need a warehouse. You can use a prep center. So you're going to be paying for that. But a lot of that's going to be related to your inventory costs and Amazon's fees and everything else. So you're going to have a very low red model if you did online arbitrage, very high yellow, and then hopefully you can underspend your sales and be able to get your green to out manage that. So just understand the different business models like bulk. If you're going to jump in and do bulk, a lot of times, and we ran into this with our office in Denver when we ended up moving away. A lot of times in the business world, you have to lock into 2 or 3 years on a lease. So be wary of that. If you're just kicking the tires and saying, "Hey, I think I can build a fire. I think this could work. I've got a small one growing and roaring, and it seems like it's going to be great." If you're going to jump in and say, "Hey, I'm going to commit to X amount of space," David always says, try and get more space than you think you need because you'll probably outgrow it. I tend to think he's right. But if you're not 100% sure that model's for you, start with something smaller because you might have to lock into something bigger, or give yourself that option to be able to scale up later. So that's Stoplight Budget in a nutshell. Hopefully it kind of takes a little bit of the uncertainty away. I know that finances can be scary. Hopefully that gives you just a rough framework. And again, if you don't know what it is, I think the biggest question you could ask yourself is, what is my number as it relates to personal finance? What does it cost to be you? Put your name in the blank. What does it cost to be Caleb? What does it cost to be Matthew? Look at the 3 to 6 months of spending. Look at your red expenses. Again, don't get overly complex here. Look at your yellow, budget categories, and then look at what you're saving and kind of sum those up and say, what does it cost to be Caleb? Once you have that number, that can sort of help guide the next steps and build all of that out. So that's what we're essentially trying to do here. Hopefully you find that helpful. And with that, we'll take some questions here, and we'll also get into the geek out moment. We will let you get back to your regularly scheduled program sooner instead of later. Matthew,
I think that's all awesome.
Any
No,
comments?
I think it's definitely something that it's good to know your number. You've always been better at this type of thing than I have been, of tracking and just personal finance in general. So I enjoy learning from you and learning all of this right here and just seeing it kind of all laid out like that. Personal finance is a tricky thing because it is something I feel like everyone to some degree is a little defensive about. Maybe sometimes they don't even understand why. Because like we said, everyone likes to show they have money, but no one likes to prove they have money, because most people are not great at managing their finances, myself included, a lot of different times. And so I think just focusing on this and learning the different aspects that go with personal finance can significantly take stress off your life. Just for me personally, with personal finance, money's like one of the biggest stressors people normally have in life in general. If you look at the different things of what people are stressed about, money is normally at the top of that list. And I wrote down a couple of things that I tend to go back to. These aren't things that are groundbreaking for anyone listening that they haven't heard before, but these are kind of 5 rules that I look at, that if something's off in my finances, if I'm stressed about money, I've normally violated one of these rules. And the very first one, which I already talked about quite a bit, is just to spend less than you make. You don't have to make a lot of money to not be stressed about finances. There's people that make $1 million a year that spend $1 million a year that are stressed every single day about their finances. So it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you spend. And like Caleb said at the Stoplight Budget, how much you keep. I remember our first 6 months after we got married or so, we had an extremely small budget. So when we first got married, we both graduated from college, me and my wife. Of course, we didn't have kids at the time. My very first job out of school, my salary for that first year was somewhere around like $37,000. So it was not a significant salary. Then my wife was in nursing school full time. And I remember it was pinching pennies every single month. But we had been extremely frugal in how we had set up our lifestyle, to where even though we were barely making anything, we weren't super stressed about money those first 6 months, because we were spending less than we made. We chose not to have unlimited data on our phones. We did the 20 megabit per second internet into the 60 megabit per second internet. I remember our food budget was $100 a month for all of our food that we try and stick to. And then we raised it to 150 a little while later, and we got a little extravagant there. But even though we made barely anything, we weren't super stressed about money because we were spending less than we made. And then there's some poor financial decisions we made where we started making more money. We tried to expand our lifestyle when we got our first raise at the job, or she started working too. And we could kind of get to this teetering point of, all right, now we're starting to spend more than or about the same that we're making, and now we're stressed about money, we're thinking about money, we're looking at that bank account balance. So spending less than you make, no matter how much you make, is I think the biggest thing you can do to just feel less stress in your life and to not worry about money as much. The other things I had here was to set a goal, but to raise your standards. I think a lot of us like to set goals. I personally like to set goals, but one of the things you'll find is that we all have subconscious standards we stick to, where if that standard is violated, we fight like crazy to fix it. But if we set a goal as kind of a nice to have, it's something we kind of aim for, but it's not something that lights us on fire, like when one of our standards has kind of been violated. I don't know how you are with this, Caleb, but I know everyone's different about dishes in their sink at their house. Some people never like dirty dishes in their sink. If any dirty dishes in their sink, their standards have been violated, they immediately take it out, put it in the dishwasher. Some people, it's like they'll let them stack up throughout the day, but you have to clean it out at nighttime. You can't have dishes sitting in there for multiple days. Or you get to people like some people I went to college with, where once it starts to smell moldy is when they get that sudden urge to go and clean the dishes. But what's funny is we all have the goal, I think, of probably having a perfectly clean kitchen with no dishes in the sink. But we often don't hit that goal, but we do have standards. And once those standards get violated, we quickly correct that action. So one thing we realized with our bank account was that is even though we had a goal of, let's say, saving money for a down payment for a home, we were comfortable with a certain number in our bank account. Once that number got lower than what we were comfortable with, we immediately figured out how to cut spending to get that number back to where it needed to be. So sometimes raising that standard, figuring out what it is first, but raising that subconscious standard you have set to, we'd like $10,000 in the bank to feel comfortable. Let's try and always keep it at $15,000 in the bank to feel comfortable. Let's make that our new standard, I think, is sometimes better than setting that $50,000 savings goal. That's kind of nice to have, even though you're comfortable having 10 in the account. So setting standards, setting goals, but raising your standards. Number 3 was set investment and saving goals, followed by a fun purchase goal. I think this is big for us because there's fun things about saving, but there's also very fun things about spending. And so one of the things we did is we had a goal for emergency savings in our family. We had a certain number we wanted to get to for emergency savings and something completely set aside, not our main savings account, just for emergencies. And we said, once we hit this goal, once we get the amount of money we want to in here, then we can go and actually build that pool we wanted to in the backyard, but not until we first hit this goal over here of setting up that emergency fund there. And it gives you more inspiration to do that savings when you have a goal of doing something else after that, once you hit that goal. That's been big for us. The biggest for me, number 4 here, is to stare your finances in the face. If you neglect your finances, don't do budgeting like Caleb's showing, it's very easy to look at the end of the month and say, oh, how did we spend so much money? Well, let's just hopefully don't spend as much next month. But it's very difficult, I figured out, to overspend when you're tracking your finances every single day or every single week. It's easy for me to forget about finances. Then I'll look back a month and say, how in the world do we have so many subscriptions going? And man, we've been charged for this for the past 6 months, and I've had no idea it's even been on our account. When you're staring at your finances all the time, I feel like it's way easier to get control and to spend less than if you're trying to push it aside, because it's not a very fun thing to look at. It's very easy to start overspending. And then this last one, number 5, is kind of going back to that I'll teach you to be rich thing that Caleb was talking about, is to focus on increasing your income rather than always focus on cutting your expenses. Maybe it's just like the entrepreneur in me. But I always like to figure out if I want to set a goal or to make a certain amount or to invest a certain amount, is what can I do to make more money versus, all right, let's cut spending here. Let's take away this subscription. Let's stop spending this. Let's sell this. It's way more fun for me to think of ways to increase our income than to try and cut every single penny that we can. And I think that's one thing Dave Ramsey misses a lot. He does focus a lot on the saving and being frugal and spending less than you make. I think that's good. But he does focus on it somewhat, but not as much as I think he probably should have, figuring out ways to increase your income versus trying to cut every single penny. So those 5 things I have on a list. I've had those on a list for a long time. When something starts stressing me out about money, when something seems off, it's normally because I've violated one of those 5 rules. And if I go back through there and readjust, like I did back in episode 11, where I was like, I've not been tracking our personal finances month to month as well as I should be. I need to set that up consistently again. It starts getting better from there. So those are 5 things that have really helped me. But let's take a look at some of the questions if we have some in here.
Real quick, I want to riff on a few things you just mentioned there. I think that's one. If I didn't realize you were going to put that much thought and effort into it, you should have just done this entire podcast, because you had nice, clear, concise bullet points, and that kind of lended itself to being able to follow along nicely. So thanks for putting the homework in there. I think the biggest thing you talked about is the idea of not like staring your finances in the face. And I love that analogy of letting the dishes pile up. Some people, they don't want any dishes to pile up. They're cleaning it the minute they're done with either cooking or eating. Some people, it's like a daily ritual. At the end of the day, they kind of put everything in the dishwasher or wash it by hand or whatever it may be. And the other party is just like, I don't care. I'm either going to wash when it smells terrible or when I run out of dishes and I have to do it. And whatever works for you is great. I think the more you can break it into bite-sized chunks, the better. So even like this sounds silly, but if you're going to be sitting on, this probably applies more to guys than girls, because we like to go sit on the, on the crapper for a couple of minutes. That's kind of our alone quiet time. It's a great chance to pull out Mint, and instead of looking at TikTok videos, apply categories to your budget. So you guys can say, Caleb told you to do mints when you're on the John. That can be great. I think that's a really good time to catch up. It might just be, I have a calendar reminder set up, I think every Tuesday night, that just says like or it might be Friday. It's just like Financial Friday. And that's a reminder just to pop in for 20 minutes and just categorize the expenses. So if you stay on top of it, it becomes less intimidating at the end of the month. Plus, if you get to the end of the month and go, man, what was that expense at this one store on the 12th of the month? You might have forgot what you spent on it, what category it is, and now you've got to waste brain power. So if you do it daily, that's great. Sometimes your expenses don't settle out and show up daily. So weekly is a great rhythm to get into. And then the idea of staring it in the face is set up those rhythms. So I like weekly, and then I set up a monthly review date to kind of go in, tidy it up, and then go in and actually look at the categories in Mint and say, all right, here's what my strategy was. And Mint is awesome. You can say, I want to spend $1,200 a month in mortgage. Well, obviously that's going to be fixed because it's a fixed mortgage, but it'll show you at the end of the month, your goal was 1,200. You actually spent 1,200, 0 is the differential. If my goal is to spend 600 on groceries and I spent 700, it says you're minus 100. So it kind of shows you that. It even shows you, like, if you're halfway through the month, it shows you a target halfway through the month, says you should be here. You're less than this, you're doing great, keep it up. Or you're more than this, you need to kind of rein it in. So getting those weekly and monthly rhythms, and set a meeting, get an accountability partner, get someone you can talk to about it. That could be your spouse, could be your significant other, could just be a buddy. But get somebody that say, hey, I really want to get my financials under control. Just like if you want to lose weight, you want to step on that scale, once a week, every Monday morning at the same time. You want to step on that scale before you shower, before you ate breakfast. So it's always consistent, and you want to kind of gauge how that's doing. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to know if you're being successful because you don't have any numbers to look at. So do that, set up those goals, set up those weekly and monthly rhythms, and give yourself that. So I think that was the most important one that you said, Matthew, was stare your finances in the face. Otherwise, you get to the end of the year and go, well, I think I have a little more than when I started, but I don't even know for sure because I don't have any way to track it. So I guess we'll try and do better next year. And that's why we make resolutions and they fall on their face. So get yourself into those rhythms. And if you can do that, if you can set it up to track properly, you can do a weekly rhythm to kind of assign it, and then a monthly rhythm to review and sort of set out that category for the next month. These are quick things. It can be 20 minutes a week for your rhythm. It might be 30 to 45 minutes just for a monthly review session. And it doesn't have to be crazy intimidating once you get in that rhythm. Once that fire is burning, once those systems work, it can be very simple to say, here's the next log to chuck in the fire, and we're going to be good for the next month. This just burns out. So that is it. Manny had a comment there as well. Manny, we still got to get you in. We need to schedule that out. You keep popping in. So thanks for watching these. You've got a great story and a very good business model. So we want to get you on the pod at some point here. But he says, once you have a clear plan in place and are actually sticking to it with those rhythms, the fastest way to grow the bottom line is to grow the top line. So that goes to number 5 that you mentioned, Matthew. We like to, the FIRE movement likes to cut expenses, but there's only so much you can cut. You still have to eat food, whether you want to eat ramen or steak. or, filet mignon or whatever. But you can only trim down your eating so much. You still have to eat to stay alive. So it's the 80-20 rule. Often, instead of just trying to pinch pennies or limit what you're doing, it can be better to say, hey, how can I get a side hustle? For us, it's books. How can I do that and grow the top line so that I have more margin? And because again, if you're making $3,000 a month and you're spending $29.99, like you're spending all of it, right? You have no margin. If you're able to get a raise, if your spouse can pick up a job, if you can start driving for Uber, if you can flip used books, all of those dollars can go right into your top line. And if you add an extra $500 a month to the top line and none of your other expenses change, that $500 increase, 100% of that can go right to the bottom line. Just like if you raise your average selling price of your books, there's a kind of a fixed fee to selling on Amazon plus that variable fee of 15%. So if you sell a $10 book, you might net $2 to $3 after fees, depending on the weight, depending on fulfillment method. But if you sell, so you're losing $7 of that 10 to fees. So 70% disappears. You're only left with 30%. But if you sell a $20 book, you might be left with $10 after fees. So you're getting 50% instead of 30% to your bottom line. So a lot of times raising that top line, raising your ASP, raising your income, if you're able to, is going to have significant impact downstream.
Love it. Yeah.
We'll take just a few questions. Other than that, hopefully we gave you some food for thought. Again, figure out a way to track things, get in weekly rhythms, a monthly meeting, share it with somebody so that you have some accountability. And above all, have a strategy. You can go back and review Matthew's personal ones or kind of build your own criteria and use that in your personal finance to kind of make sure that you're less stressed about money. And guys, let's practice talking about it. If you guys see me in Atlanta, feel free to ask questions. I'm a little more open in person. I don't like to share all my numbers just out on the interwebs, but ask questions. Ask like, hey, how does this actually work in the real world? How did you set up your business when I started this as a part-time thing. I didn't need that money to put back my personal income. So I was able to pour every dollar from my side hustle back into the book business and ramp it up and take bigger bets, bigger risks, and eventually be able to have that fire roaring. So I was able to step aside my day job in 2015, and I haven't worked for the man or the woman since. So the more you can do that, the more you can do something on the side and play with those kind of risk-free margins, the better off it's going to be.
Someone asks, how do you track a refund initiated by Amazon?
What's up, Claude? So if Amazon initiates the refund, so the customer returns it, Amazon is just going to take that money back out of your account. Once the book shows up, the book goes back. If it's damaged, they'll still ship it back to you. Depending on your settings, they might dispose of it. So make sure you check your settings. If it's good to go, it'll go back into inventory and you can resell it. So you don't necessarily have to track it. It's going to just come right out of your payment. So Amazon does that for you. And sometimes they'll hold money back in reserve just in case. So usually not too much to do in that world.
Have you heard of this one before? Someone said they tried to list on the FBA, they're doing it for years, but they got an error. They're not registered for fulfillment by Amazon.
I haven't seen that. My hunch is that's an API glitch. Maybe the software they're using switched to the SP API, the new seller API, or it could be just a software glitch on Amazon side or whoever they're using. So if you're listing through Seller Central, obviously it's Amazon. If you're listing through a software, then check with them to make sure there's no issues there. Typically, if you're a pro, you don't even have to be a pro seller to sell FBA, but typically you're approved to sell FBA unless something happened, but usually that impacts your entire account.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. Yes, to answer this question, did bourbon get added to this so it'll have a legitimate business expense? I write all of these off. I don't know if you do, Caleb. Do you? I'm just kidding.
Unfortunately, I do not. My CPA just kind of frowns upon that. But
it's a background prop for your video. It should be a business expense.
Yeah.
You can write off all those bottles we can see in the background right there because it's a business prop.
Get a different account if that's the case. But no, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I definitely use these to meet people, and I've met some amazing people from all walks of life that are they love bourbon. They're crazy about it. I love people that get into the weeds or the rabbit trails of anything. So it's been really fascinating to meet people through the bourbon world, as well as most of this tends to go up in value even as stock markets are declining. I don't know if that's going to continue to be the case, but if it does, then hopefully that helps me. It's fun to find it. It's fun. Some people collect old books or Pokemon cards. I just collect sometimes rare bottles. So it's been fun. I've got to learn the industry, meet some fascinating people, and maybe I make some money. If not, I can at least drink it.
Nice. This question right here, it says, would love to see the unit economics per book of different models in general. I think this would be an awesome infographic to make of showing like side by side cherry picking, micro bulk, kind of like you showed in that budget breakdown there, of kind of roughly based on the customers that have given data, what that kind of looks like broken out. So people looking to maybe make a jump from one to the other can see, do I really want to? Do I want to incur these extra expenses? And how it kind of all shakes out in the end would be a kind of cool thing to see as an infographic.
That would be have you seen the ones that Visual Capitalist does? They'll take like Google, their income, or Starbucks or whoever, and they'll actually break it out and say, here's all the sources on the left. I'll go left because you guys are seeing me the other direction, I think. Is this over on the left side of the screen?
That's my left side of the screen, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go left to right. So left is all the sources of income. So it might be like store revenue, credit cards, whatever. So you have all the sources of income, and then they kind of link together, and then they go over to the right side over here. Sorry, and they go to the right side and breaks out all the expenses. So that'd be interesting. And again, you could break it out red, yellow, green. The Amazon expenses are going to be your pieces of that as well. But it'd be fascinating. So in general, the higher the average selling price or ASP, the more money per book is going to come back out, and then you can apply that. So, I went and saw Franklin Media down in Dallas a couple of weeks ago. They sell primarily textbooks. Their average selling price is very, very high relative to most other book models. That allows them to hire really great talent. It allows them to spend extra money on equipment. It allows them to sort of have more room to invest back into the business because they're less stressed about trying to sell the next $8 or $10 book and squeeze a little bit of margin out of it and just work so hard and just keep spinning your wheels. So the higher ASP, the better. Now, of course, not everybody can sell textbooks. They've done number of things to give themselves a competitive moat and advantage. So that is, the higher ASP, the better. If you're running cherry picking operation, I would try and push the ASP higher because you're going to have to work less hard to bring home the same money. So there's a lot of things you can do there, but that would be a fun infographic to do as well.
Another question here we have says, I sent in my first shipment finally, but out of 25 books, 17 are stranded. Tried to create new listings, which is suggested by keep getting an error message. If they're books, you definitely don't need to be creating new listings for 17 books.
No, so a lot of listing software will have some issues. I don't know how you listed those to Miko. Jewel Child, I don't know if that's your seller name, but Amico looks like your name is. What typically happens is the listing software got ahead of itself. So it listed the item, it threw the price on it before the SKU was uploaded. Sometimes Amazon servers take a bit. And so a lot of times if you're using AccelerList, you can actually go back in and resubmit the feed. I think there's something similar in Inventory Lab or ScanLister. So I would check that first, check whatever listing software you're using, go back in and resubmit the feed. And a lot of times that will then catch the SKU. And then Amazon will go, oh, there's the SKU. It matches up to the ASIN that we have or the ISBN, and we're good to go. So I would check that. I'm betting that's all you need to do. I don't think you have to take those out for a round trip and then send them back in. And it looks like you are using AccelerList. So go back into your batch that's there. Simply click resubmit feed. Sometimes you can wait as little as 10 to 15 minutes. It might take you half a day, but do that. Cross your fingers, spin around twice, whatever you want to do for good luck, and see if that does the job for you. Well, with that, I think we're just going to wind it down and kind of keep it a very chill episode. Real quick, Matthew, geek out moment. I've just been geeking out over music. I've been getting back into music and kind of reliving some music from high school. It's kind of fun to go back and listen to songs that were meaningful to me then and just see what pops up. And I busted my guitar out this afternoon, was kind of playing along with some of them, and it was just nice to reminisce and just get some tunes going. So I love music. I'm always listening to something. I'm not the best at kind of having quiet time, but it's been really fun just this past week to just bust out my guitar and kind of get back into some of the songs of my childhood. So a little walk down memory lane. What have you been geeking out about this week?
I need to bring out my guitar. That's one thing I think about every once in a while. I enjoy playing guitar, but I so rarely ever bring out my guitar. I need to do that more often, a little more consistently.
Well, maybe episode 18, we can do a little sing-along karaoke session.
I know, I'll just put my guitar up on the wall behind me as a prop. Which direction? That direction over there, and have it for every single episode up there and be one of those people that doesn't play it, but I see it behind me every single time. Geek out moment.
I think if we did a karaoke, we would end up with everybody unsubscribing at once.
Oh, we would. Speaking about subscribing, if anyone wants to listen to these, they are all a podcast now, all the different main podcast networks. If you guys do have a favorite podcast provider like iTunes or Spotify, leaving us a review on there would be great to be able to get more eyeballs on this podcast. Specifically, Spotify, they raise you up a lot in the rankings if you have some reviews on there, and it's just one simple click to rate the show. This episode will be on there tomorrow, and normally the day after we go live. The episodes go live there. So if you ever want to tune in but don't have time when we go live, you can always go back on and listen to audio only, speed it up if you want to, and listen there. So back to the geek out moment. I read this book. I forget how I heard about it. I think it was randomly suggested to me, actually. It's called The 12-Hour Walk by Colin Brady. I believe it's a newer book, unless I'm just late to the game. Yeah, it was published August 2nd, 2022. So it's a new book. But it's by a famous kind of adventurer explorer. He set world records for a bunch of different things. He was the first solo man-powered trip across Antarctica. He had a sled and he went all the way across Antarctica by himself for the very first time, set a world record doing that. But he talks about kind of the importance of being with your thoughts and spending time with your thoughts. And it's something not a lot of people do, but something you get a lot of clarity from. And so with all these super long adventures that he's done, especially like that trip across Antarctica, he's figured out a lot just by being stuck in his mind and thinking through the thoughts that most people don't ever get a chance to. So anyways, he made this philosophy of doing a 12-hour walk that anyone can do, where basically you set aside a day and you literally just walk for 12 hours. You don't have to set a certain distance. You can rest as much as you want. The rules are your phone is in airplane mode. You don't look at it and you don't go with anyone else. It's just you, and there's no music, no podcast, nothing but you just taking 12 hours to hopefully walk. But if you can't, you can walk a mile and sit down if you want to. But is to go out there with the goal of thinking through a few different things that you have in your life that you've been meaning to think through that you haven't taken the time to, and devoting it 12 hours of your day. And it's something that I may do once the weather cools down, because it's one of those things I rarely am without sound or distractions or talking or listening. And if I ever have a downtime where I'm in the car by myself, it's normally not silent. I either have a podcast on or I'm listening to music. I rarely ever have those quiet times where I'm just kind of uncomfortably stuck in your own mind and you have to think through things you've been avoiding. So once the weather cools down, I might try that. It's called the 12-Hour Walk. It's by Colin O'Brady. And even if you guys don't want to do the 12-hour walk, it's a short book and it's really cool. He explains a lot of the different adventures he went on, a lot of different things he learned from those, and how it kind of each applies to doing a 12-hour walk. It says invest one day and conquer. What does it say to conquer? Cutting it off right here. But invest one day of your time, basically, and basically conquer your mind through those 12 hours. What?
Conquer your mind and unlock your best life. It sounds like a meditation where you sort of get into body, where you basically force your body to do it, get yourself in the present where you're not necessarily thinking about the future. It kind of seems like a very basic, well, not basic, but a very intense meditation practice.
Yeah, exactly. It's 12 hours isn't crazy either. If you start at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., you're done by dinner time. It's not a crazy commitment to take one day and eventually do that and kind of see what comes about. Worst thing you could do is you have a nice long walk, you get burned a lot of calories, and you figure out that you don't want to do that again. Best case scenario is you have some good breakthroughs and things that you think through that you had been avoiding thinking through before that. So I will probably try that one day when the weather cools off here in Arizona a bit more, because I'm pretty sure I would die right now if I tried it for 12 hours.
Sounds fascinating. If anybody wants to check it out, 12, the number 12, 12, hourwalk.com, and it actually kind of explains it. It sounds really cool. You have to have some intentions, and the idea is like 12 hours sounds like something you couldn't do. So if you do it, Matthew, report back. That'd be really fun. Of course, don't record it as you go. Don't live stream this to Instagram. It kind of defeats the purpose, but it'd be really fascinating to hear if you do that.
I'll have a video production crew following me, so it looks really meditational, but I've actually got like 12 people. Yeah, no, it'll be good. I'll report back if I do that or when I do that.
Love it. Well, with that, we will wind down episode 17. Next week, we'll be back to a regularly scheduled program where we have an actual interviewee. I know this was fewer people watching live. If you did enjoy it, if you got some value, do go ahead and smash that like button. Go ahead and subscribe or get notified. Hit the bell if that still exists. and get notified when we do go live on the channel. We'll be back to interviewing sellers and learning sort of what makes them tick and what works well. So with that, any last words, Matthew?
No, that's it.
Cool. Well, we will say goodbye and catch you all next week. Over
See you
and
guys.
out.